Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a divorce mediator in St. Louis, Missouri. I have the pleasure of discussing the future of litigation and online mediation services with Winter Wheeler, a prominent lawyer, arbitrator, and mediator in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Winter. How are you?
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm doing well today.
This is awesome. So we want to talk about the future of litigation and mediation and all of these fabulous things, but I think we have to kind of go back and start with some of the basics. So our audience is used to listening to topics about valuation and business. And I think that this is a really interesting area. But if we start with just the basics, like people know what lawyers are typically, they know that you can also call them attorneys. But what is litigation kind of in your scope of the term?
Well, I guess in the most basic terms, litigation is a formal legal process where you have filed a complaint, there's been an answer, there's going to be a discovery process, there are lawyers involved potentially. It's going to be a back and forth kind of situation potentially for years, and possibly ending with a trial. So that's the formal litigation process, and that's typically what you see on shows like Law and Order. And I'm going to give it a throwback to something that I never even saw because it was beyond, it was before my time. But like LA Law.
Oh, yeah. I vaguely remember that. I don't want to date myself too much.
I don't even know why I vaguely remember that. I remember my parents kicking me out of the room so they could watch LA Law. And I know that people refer to it a lot. So I threw it out there.
Well, and I think that people get confused because they always think that I'm a lawyer, but I'm really just an expert. You know, I was like, I know I work with a lot of lawyers, and they're like, I don't really know what that means. But in in the context of litigation, most people just think that it's suing somebody. And the reality is there could be civil litigation, which is kind of the realm that I play in as an expert, which is in divorce. A lot of times are partnership disputes. So it's like a person suing another person. But there's also criminal litigation or commercial litigation. And you kind of have an expertise in some of those realms. So what has your practice kind of been focused on in the past?
Well, primarily my focus is on civil litigation.
Oh, okay.
My entire practice essentially has been civil litigation. I did start in 2006. I graduated from law school, passed the Florida bar, and I was a public defender for a little while. So I did criminal litigation. It was not my thing. So I did that for just a little while, and I switched very quickly into civil litigation. And so I've been doing that for quite a while, and I won't say how long. And I've done some domestic litigation. Actually, most people don't know that about me. But I am actually a Georgia domestic registered mediator with a specialization in domestic violence as well. Yeah.
Kind of an area that people don't typically want to spend a lot of time in. But
I mean, it's not fun. No.
No, it's not.
No.
Anytime that you get children involved or you get other types of things involved, it's a little complicated. But in the litigations, we kind of have litigation on one side that people think, right? And then we have this, I guess, lesser known concept called mediation. And so what is mediation to you, or how do you kind of envision it or describe it to people?
So whenever a non-attorney asks me what mediation is, I describe my role as I facilitate conversations between feuding parties that have legal disputes, and I attempt to assist them in resolving those disputes. And for the most part, I think people understand that, or they're just being very polite and
Right.
telling me that they understand what that means when I say it. But sometimes, I get very well-meaning LinkedIn and Facebook posts that say, "Oh, how did you get so involved in meditation? It sounds so relaxing."
Not we're yeah, we're
No,
missing a letter there, but
yeah.
we're close. Close. Meditation, mediation, no,
Right. Like
not really.
sometimes I wish my mediation clients would meditate for a little while, but no, there's no meditation involved.
Well, and I think that sometimes people get a little confused thinking that mediation is really a place that somebody's going to come in and tell them what to do. And
Yeah.
so I think that if we talk about things and we get a little bit deeper, is that we have to understand what is a mediator. And is a mediator really like a judge that comes in and says, okay, you guys are going to do this and this is how it's going to go? Or does it look a little bit different?
Oh, it's absolutely different. So, I when I meet clients, in the morning and they're there, typically it's their first mediation. I explain to them, I am a lawyer. You don't have to be a lawyer to be a mediator, but I am one. And so I explain that I'm not wearing my lawyer hat. I'm wearing my mediator hat. And my job is really just to make sure conversations are productive and that they are happening appropriately between both sides. I am a neutral party. I am not in favor of any particular outcome. I'm not in favor of any one side of the argument. I have no horse in the race or dog in the fight, whatever whatever euphemism you want to use. And I'm not a judge. I don't tell anyone what they should do. I don't necessarily even make suggestions about what I think you should do. To a certain extent, if I think it's necessary, I will make some comments on reality testing. If I think someone is being a little bit unreasonable, I will make that known. But I read the room. I make sure that the people that I'm working with are going to be receptive to that, and I evaluate and judge accordingly, um, and move forward with whatever I think would be appropriate, and whatever they'd be receptive to.
Well, and I think it's a very interesting area because mediation really is part, moderator, part communication or facilitator. A lot of times I'm coming into a situation as a co-mediator and I'm focused on a business valuation in some context. And that is giving some information, right? But the main mediator, or if I'm just mediating alone, I'm really just trying to help them see some facts,
Right.
and maybe with some experience from the litigation side, trying to help them understand what maybe the courts would do, right? Or if you've seen, really with mediation, if you've seen a lot of different things happen, you might have 5 different suggestions of options, whereas they're just coming in with 1 or 2, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I use that the same way that you would use it. So you use your own background and your own experience and your own realm of knowledge to do that. And I call it reality testing. Um, but yes, you give them information about what you've seen and what you know. And of course, I can't guarantee what a judge might do, but if I'm familiar with a judge and I know a lot about how they've decided certain things, I'm going to tell them that. If I know a lot about a certain county, I'm going to tell them that. If I know a lot about the makeup of a county, the demographics of a county, I'm going to let you know that as well. And it's been especially interesting now with COVID, how things that we thought we knew about juries in specific areas have, those things have changed. And so we don't have data to back up what a jury in a certain place might do, because that jury looks a heck of a lot different than it did before. Because if we're going to be doing potentially a virtual jury, it's not the same group of people that would be showing up if we were doing it in person. And then also vice versa. If we do end up doing in-person juries, you're going to find a different group of people than would show up if you were doing it virtually. And then, my God, the hybrid model of, I could go on and on for hours about virtual jury trials, and I have before, and that's not the point here. But
No, I think actually it's a good topic, because I think in Georgia, I would assume it's the whole state of Georgia, even divorces could be done with a jury, right? Like, is it
yes,
all litigation or just some, talk to people, because in Missouri, it might be a little bit different. Like in a divorce situation in Missouri, we might just talk to a judge. We might not have a jury. But in Georgia, you could request a jury. And so
right.
you guys have a lot more jury trials than maybe other states.
Right. And so for our family law lawyers, it's been very interesting. Frankly, I think it's crazy in Georgia that we can have jury trials for domestic issues. Those matters are so personal. No one really needs to be involved in that process. So I'm a big proponent of mediation for domestic issues all the time. I certainly wouldn't want anybody jumping into the middle of my relationship trying to decide what my husband and I should be doing. We've been married for 11 years now. That's just crazy. But yeah, your jury is going to look different. So you have to keep that in mind. And how is that going to affect the valuation of your case? And so when we look backward, right? So if Georgia went, well, not all of Georgia, but Atlanta, basically went into lockdown in March. And so at that time, we're talking about pending cases, not cases that were brand new or that were filed during the pandemic. And we had definitely did not have a lot of cases that were filed during the pandemic, because our Supreme Court granted extensions on statutes of limitations and things like that. So what we're looking at are cases that were filed and worked up in a completely different era, essentially. And so the work that was done with an eye toward using an in-person jury threat that no longer exists. And so the jury that I'm threatening you with in that particular county doesn't look like the jury we might have if we go virtual. It doesn't look like the jury we might have if we wait another year and we go in person. So the variables have changed, and no one really knows what it might look like. So a lot of people have made that switch over to wanting to mediate, which I love. I mean, that's my thing. You know, and it's completely changed the playing field for us, right? And so we have had to go back and reevaluate cases. I say we, I don't really mean we, but the attorneys, and see if there's anything that they need to do differently. Is there something that is inherently different now, based on the fact that the jurors may be significantly different? They may be very demographically different than you went into it, than you assumed when you went into it.
Well, and I think that you are gently talking about something that I think a lot of people try to deal with, which is implicit bias, and take it a step further, because we're seeing this in schools, we're seeing this in just the communities in general. When you don't have sufficient access to internet and Wi-Fi and computers and all of these resources, you are going to preclude an entire population that would have normally been a population you would pull from for a jury, that is not going to be available. And that is a big issue that, quite frankly, in March, April, May, June, July, we thought that this would end. We were just like, okay, we're just going to sit back, wait for it to go back to normal. And we're not there anymore. And so we
Right.
have to say, okay, well, what does this look like now? And I know you have, I don't know if you want to talk about it, the jury selection, the implicit bias. I mean, obviously these are huge issues. But the courts, what I'm hearing you say is that everybody in general doesn't know what to expect. We don't know how this is going to affect the outcomes. And who is it going to disadvantage? We know it will disadvantage populations, and we can probably accurately identify those populations. But do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I could talk about that all day. I don't know if you want to. I have written article after article about this starting, oh my God, in May, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So what we know is that the digital divide is real, and I'm not well versed in exactly what it is in Missouri, but in Georgia, it is a very stark divide. And we have, I live in Atlanta. Atlanta is a metropolis. It is a huge city. There are millions upon millions of people here, and within the city itself, and then of course the surrounding counties and the suburbs. And we have amazing access to internet, so we're not so burdened by that. But Georgia is a big state
Yeah.
in the sense that we have a lot of counties. I'm not going to venture to guess how many counties it is because I don't want to get it wrong. But it's a lot. And not every county is well equipped to handle, and it's not always counties, it's cities as well. So it's not every municipality that is readily equipped to handle troubles with the digital divide. And worse than that, even if you have your citizenry is equipped with high-speed internet, things like that, you've got parents at home with children who don't necessarily have a place to be alone and conduct their obligations as jurors for hours on end. I have 4 children. I hope you can't hear them right now, but I can. And so I would be a great juror. I'll never end up on a jury. I've been a lawyer for far too long, but I would be a great juror. I just want to make that clear. But it would be very hard for me because I have 4 small children. I typically work from home, but I'm also like running around making sure I'm teaching kids like math and handwriting and all these other types of things all day long. So for me to be able to sign an affidavit saying I can be alone for 8 hours, I can't do it. I can't do it. And that's what a lot of these venues are doing when they are asking jurors for their availability. And it's absolutely insane. And so, I don't know if you even knew this before we started having this conversation, but I have been very, very involved in the push against virtual jury trials, in part because of this reason. There's no way to ensure that women, homemakers, caretakers, and that's caretakers of young children, the elderly, and women in general who need to multitask, because let's be real, women are the ones who are multitasking, and it's the women who are being forced out of the workplace in droves like we have never seen. The statistics show that we've probably lost about 20 years worth of progress for women's work rights in 8 months.
Mhm.
So that's what we're seeing. And so, of course, for me to consider a virtual jury trial, knowing that we are going into it already with these strikes against us, these women are not going to be on the jury for these reasons, and then we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of people who live in rural areas where there just is no infrastructure for it. These municipalities don't have the money to create the infrastructure. And even if they did, there's no short-term way to create infrastructure like this.
Mhm.
There just isn't. It takes years. It takes years to get that type of infrastructure out into the country. So there's no quick way around this.
Mhm.
And we are, as citizens of the United States, and not even as citizens, as potential defendants, potential parties to lawsuits in the United States, we are entitled to jurors of our juries of our peers,
Mhm.
and whatever capacity that looks like. And right now, we cannot guarantee that. And so, for me, God forbid I'm a party to a lawsuit, I want a jury that looks like me, that sounds like me, that has a bunch of kids that are, currently banging on my door, trying to get in here, trying to figure out why is mommy not available to me
Right.
right now.
Right.
Those women would not be on the jury. They
Yeah.
wouldn't be there. And so, you know, I say, why go into a system like that, knowing in advance that it is unfair and it is unequal? We already know, and we have to admit that the system we had in place pre-COVID was unfair and it was biased toward a lot of people. But we were all working very hard to get past that and to move forward. So why on earth would we come up with hopefully a stopgap solution that could potentially make that so much worse?
Right. Well, and I think that, part of what you're kind of alluding to is the current status of litigation. So, regardless of what
Yeah.
county you're in, what state you're in, it has significantly changed. And almost, like I kind of hear it from an expert standpoint, we're kind of continuing to do what we need to do, right? From a person in litigation, though, and from the attorneys that I'm talking to, can we adequately represent, like from an attorney standpoint, can they adequately represent their client? If we just continue with current litigation, are we going to get to the point that all of these cases are going to be appealed at some point in the future? I mean, to
Yeah.
me, that's the scary part is we
Mhm.
still work to do
Yeah.
stuff that eventually is going to say, ugh, that COVID case, their jury pool was ridiculous, or they tried to do this thing on screen and there was technology issues. I mean, you can't guarantee one person has technology issues and you have 10 people on the line. You are all kind of going slower. So let's
Yes.
talk about that a little bit, because it leads into why mediation is really a great option. But the current status of litigation in Missouri is basically not moving. That's just what's happening. And I
Yeah.
think it's
And
in other places too.
Yeah, and that's happening all over the country. And you are right. What we are going to see are appeals like you have never seen before. So we can move forward with a lot of these things. They're just going to be appealed. We are creating more problems than we need, and for no reason. So, like you mentioned specifically, slow internet, someone dropping out. And sometimes you don't even notice someone has dropped out. You've been in that Zoom where you're paying attention to what you're doing and what your presentation is, and then suddenly you're like, "Where's Mike? Mike? Oh, Mike's gone. Well, how long has Mike been gone? We don't even know. We don't even know." So then at that point, what do you do? So then you have a conversation about whether you do that testimony over again. Do you play a recorded testimony? Do you let the jurors read a transcript? But then how was the transcript taken? Did you use a court reporter? Did you use a digital transcription service? A lot of people are using the digital transcription service. Zoom has its own transcription process that's going on right now, which works pretty darn well. But I can imagine an intelligent attorney using every single one of these alternatives as a reason for an appeal, no matter what. It doesn't matter how.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It could be the best decision. It could be the best decision. And it doesn't matter. It's going to turn into an appeal. It's going to become an expensive process. And we need to do our best to minimize these things. And personally, I think it's the bias situation, the selection bias in the jury selection. That's going to be the biggest issue. But yes, all of these other issues are going to become problems. We consider, what happens in an actual jury deliberation process, right? So, you have a foreperson, and in person, the foreperson is almost always the strongest, toughest person in the room. But what does that look like online? Is that the person who maybe had the strongest internet the whole time? Is that the person who thinks they heard the most? Is that the person who thinks they took the best notes because they heard it? Who knows? And right now we don't have a way of preventing people from taking notes, inappropriate notes, because nobody's there at your house to grab the notebook from you before you leave the courthouse. And there's no one there to make sure you aren't simultaneously off to the side Googling whatever piece of information in real time. It's one thing to violate a court order, which of course you shouldn't do, but it's one thing to do it when you get home and it's kind of a distant memory. And it's a whole other to be able to say, oh, he was at such and such address and he was supposed to get to this and he said he did it in X time. And well, my GPS says that you could do that at that time of day, because that's what Waze told me.
Well, and it's going to lead to COVID, aftermath litigation. So you're going to clog the system at some point. Yes. I mean, and the reality is most of us have kids online. Most of us have been doing Zoom this entire time. And can any of us say, sure, let me sit there for 8 hours? First of all, and pay
Impossible.
attention, pay attention. 8 hours, I look over at one of my kids doing homeschooling and they've been online for 15 minutes and they're doing cartwheels or something. We just don't have that capacity.
Right.
And then who's suffering? Well, obviously the people in the trial, but also we're going to have, we're putting all of these people through this process. Now, even with normal, like a judge, like a bench trial or anything like that, you have complications. When I come in and talk about a business valuation, it's very hard to do without kind of reading the room, like you said, and
Yeah.
seeing, oh, so and so's falling asleep. Okay, let's get them. Well, you're not going to have the same thing. Now, that being said, I think that we can now say, okay, we have the picture of litigation. Even if you file, you're barely going to get a court date, right? You're looking
Right.
at 2021, 2022, who knows? Judges,
Who knows?
who knows, really? Judges, like in some areas, rotate off at the end of the year. So we have this rotation of judges sometimes at the end of the year. So that's all happening. But now we come back to some of the benefits of online mediation. And so, how is this, if online trials don't work very well, how is online mediation different and how can it be successful?
Online mediation is a completely different animal, completely different. So when you think about the justice system, the jury trial is the pinnacle, right? It is the pinnacle. That's the thing that sets the American system apart from every other system. And we've got to get that right. That's the end. That's it. But mediation is a process that is typically voluntary. Um, but whether you go into it voluntarily or not, the parties have a lot of leeway. They don't have to make decisions about their case that they don't want to make. There is the right or the privilege of self-actualization. They are there to make decisions about their case. And that's the point. So your parties show up, they learn what they can about the other side, they present their information, they make sure their story is heard, they get that emotional kind of catharsis, which is super, super, super important, which is often, almost always missing from a trial. But they have the opportunity to decide what they want to do. And they don't have to decide anything,
right,
at all. So mediation is completely different because at the end of the day, you can leave without having done anything that was binding. You still have the opportunity to go forward with the trial. You could go forward with an arbitration. You could go forward with doing nothing for a while. You could go forward with another mediation. You could go forward with informal negotiations, either amongst your lawyers, the parties, however, or with your mediator. I do that a lot too.
Well, and I think the interesting, so here's something that I was just thinking about while you were talking. But in the past, right, we would do litigation. Somebody files litigation because they're like, hey, you're not doing what you're supposed to do, or we contractually agreed to. So I'm going to sue you and I'm going to get that court date. And then we talk about this, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but 85, 95% of cases settle on the courtroom steps, right? Because that impending court date is forcing you to settle. Well, now you got your court date in 2022. So there's nothing impending. So now the interesting concept, though, is that the only way to get something done is to come back out of litigation and come into mediation or arbitration or an alternative dispute resolution, right? Which this didn't exist. Like you would just in the past, like pre-COVID, you'd be like, well, maybe I'll mediate. Okay, let's try it. Whereas now it's if you want to get something done, you have to come back out to this, which is fascinating because we might actually be more successful in mediation because you can't have a court date, right? So the only way to get resolution is everybody's going to have to start I don't know, working together. And and it might not even be working together, but you have to start communicating. And I think where people like you and I come in, and I've read some of the things that you've talked about, is that we are coming in and we're sensing, right, some of the communication issues. And we're trying to, like I hear what this person says over here and I hear what this person says, but you guys are going whoop. And we come in and we say, look, what about this? Now that's very different, right? But that's
Yeah.
kind of the the communication piece is kind of where we come in as mediators. So I actually think that people will start doing this way more often, and it will we'll have higher success because you don't have other options right now. And we don't know
Right.
when that's going to end, right?
Right. And I don't know what you noticed in your practice, but here in Georgia, we went on lockdown in Atlanta. We went on lockdown in about mid-March. And so I saw a slight dip in cases that were being mediated in like April and May, with people thinking, oh, we'll get back to normal really soon. And when that didn't happen, things started to pick back up slowly, but they picked back up. And so we call it the trial hammer. So without the trial hammer, what are we really doing? What are we talking about? But yes, things have turned around. I think that attorneys have realized the importance of what mediators do, and just how important the translation is and what happens in the other room that they don't see.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes lawyers they went into mediation feeling like it was just potentially another step in the process. Maybe this is just another way to save money. And I think that now they're looking at it as though, wow, this is really an important step. And it was something that I didn't understand completely. Because mediators do far more than a good mediator does, far more than deliver numbers back and forth. We understand the parties, we listen to the parties, we figure out what it is that you really want, what you really want. We help you figure out what you really want. We help your client figure out what they really want. What is the relationship that needs to be salvaged, if there's a relationship that needs to be salvaged? What does that relationship cost you if you don't salvage it?
Mm-hmm.
What are you willing to give to keep that relationship going? What do you need at the end of the day, really? And a lot of the time, it is not just a dollar figure. And often attorneys do not understand that. They don't understand that. They are looking at spreadsheets, they are looking at bottom lines, and they are looking past or hearing past what their clients might be saying. And I think back to my time as a litigator, and sometimes I did that too. And it was because I was so busy trying to bill my hours. If my client called me and was just complaining and whining for a really long time, sometimes I just put them on speakerphone. I mean, I'm not a therapist. Do
Right.
I have a high EQ? Yes, I do. I consider myself to be an empath. But in my capacity as a litigator, that was not my job. It was not for me to work as your therapist. Like I'm not literally qualified to do that. But in my capacity as a mediator, when I have on my active listening hat, I can hear what you're saying and I can interpret that and I can take that to the other side and I can say, okay, yes, they do want this, but this is also a big issue for them. Their feelings are hurt because you did X. Do you know that you did X? Did you realize you did X? Did they tell you their feelings were hurt about X? Because this is a problem. So how can we address this too? Because this is not just a money thing. Or maybe we can think about this in another way. And, sometimes attorneys will will think, I don't understand why we can't get this solved together. I've been calling him and calling him and calling him. Well, it's because you're saying the exact same thing over and over again. And the two of you cannot communicate that way. That's just it. You don't have compatible communication styles. And for mediators, we are taught and we learn different communication styles.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might hear A, I hear A, B, C, and D. And then I can figure out that the other person needs to hear D. And I tell them D. It's the exact same thing. It's just stated differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I can facilitate that in a way in which those attorneys could not do it. And for me, it is the most amazing feeling. It's beautiful. It makes me so happy at the end of the day when I have brought two sides together, or however many people, when they have been arguing for year 2, 3 over the same issues. And I'm like, listen, we can get this done. You're talking past each other. You just got to slow it down a little bit.
Right. And that's kind of why they call mediators neutrals. And we use that term a lot, is that we're kind of there for the greater good of the whole. But I think an interesting point that you made me think of when you were talking is that in litigation, we try to identify what each person wants, right? And then we hold that, because if we hold it from you, then we have power to leverage you to do something we want. And in mediation, I think it's a little bit reversed. I'm trying to figure out, and I'll tell this with divorcing couples. I'll be like, hey, do you know what your wife or husband wants? Like, do you know what their biggest thing that they want? How do we figure out how to get them that? And you figure out what you need. And then we work out all the little details. But that's very different of saying, okay, this is what I want. And this is what, and sometimes they're not the same thing, like I think a good mediator training that I went to, they were talking about an orange, so it's like everybody's fighting over the orange, right? But one person really wanted the orange skin to make like a great cocktail. And somebody else wanted the pulp, the inside of the orange, to make orange juice. And if they really came together, they'd realize that they could have what they wanted and the other person could too, but you had to work through that communication and that negotiation. And that's that's how we come into it.
I've heard that. And
I probably I'm going to have to find out who told me that so that I can give them credit.
I think that's beyond
good.
giving credit.
Okay, good.
But anyway, the point is, like you're saying, is that a lot of people miss finding out why the other person wants the orange. You're fighting over the orange. I want the orange. No, I want the orange. But why do they want the orange?
Yeah.
You want the rind. I want the juice.
But like,
we can share this one orange.
Right.
We only need one.
And I think it's hard because people, and these all have terms in mediation. They have positions, beliefs, values, all of these terms. But in general, it's sort of like if you want to split a house, like somebody's got to keep the main house and somebody's got to go. And it's like, well, but can you step back and say, do you want a peaceful place to live? Yes. Do you want a place to live that's in that same area? The kids can go to the same school? Yes. Could it be that there's two houses that serve that purpose and it's not the main middle one? Yes. And so a lot of it is us trying to get deeper into what's really, going on, like kind of, I believe that mediation is a lot of psychology. It's a lot of negotiation and communication. But it's easier for me to talk about those things when I'm not financially invested in that process. So those people are financially invested. They can't see anything else. And we come in and say, okay, well, did you look at it from this point of view? And they're like, oh, that was a good idea. Well, it's not like we're geniuses, right? We can just see it a little bit further back than maybe they could.
Well, listen, I am a genius, but
Girl, me too. No, just kidding. No, I'm not kind of, but
Oh,
my goal
yeah,
in
but no, really, it's that step back, because when you're not emotionally involved and when you haven't been entrenched in the facts and how the facts apply to the law and whatever for years on end, you don't have a stake in the fight, um I'm not there to prove to my client that I've been giving you the right evaluation for the past 3 years. Like, it doesn't matter to me. Uh, it doesn't matter. I can look at it from that, I guess, bird's eye view, and tell everybody how I feel, and tell both of them, well, I think this might be right about what you're saying, but I also think that this might be wrong about what you're saying. And as a third party, and as someone who is impartial and not beholden to either of you, I think this.
Mhm.
And to the extent that I have experience with the jury pool or the jurisdiction, I can give some insight into that as well.
Mhm.
When we talk about valuations of cases, often the valuation is what the valuation is. And
Mhm.
it's a matter of helping everybody come to terms with what that valuation is.
Mhm. Well, and a lot of times when I'm doing a joint valuation, which is what we'll deal with in a mediation or in a lot of other situations, because quite frankly, people are tired of paying two experts to fight about stuff in court. And so
Yes.
I come in as a joint expert and I'm doing the same type of neutral thing. Like, let me neutrally look at the company and say what the value is, knowing that one person wants it higher and one person, I get that. I know that, but the numbers are the numbers. But let's talk a little
Mhm.
bit about your mediation practice. So, we are in the middle of a pandemic and we are actively still creating information, even though we don't know the future. But how has your mediation practice changed with COVID-19?
Oh, it's like night and day. So, my mediation practice is actually very young. So I went full time as a mediator November the 1st of 2019. So my business is 1 year old. And so I was doing really well and I was so excited and things were great. And I'm a people person. So being a mediator for me is just amazing. I got to meet people all the time, got to hang out with new people every day. Um, and then COVID hit and the city shut down. And
Mhm.
I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so thankfully, the firm that I'm affiliated with quickly pivoted online, and we worked really hard to learn the Zoom platform initially, and then learned other platforms as necessary. But my practice has gone completely online. I still offer in-person services, but my clientele has really only wanted to be online. So every time I get a booking, I like check and I'm like, yep, it's by Zoom or it's by WebEx or it's by, whatever it is, but it's been virtual the entire time since March.
And there's some
So that's the big
efficiencies to it,
change.
right? I mean, there's some
Oh yeah.
efficiencies to being online. A lot of times, especially like you talked about doing some stuff having to do with domestic violence, but especially in those situations, we used to have significant protocols for a mediation of when people get there, how they get into the room, if there's a domestic violence issue, right? How they leave, the protocols I mean, there was so much. And quite frankly, those parties didn't want to be in the same room or the same building together anyway. And you also have that in mediation. I mean, this is usually some conflict, and you have people that are like, I'm perfectly happy not to be with that person or that group, whatever it is. And so I think
Yeah.
that it has flourished. I think for some of us who are doing a lot online anyway, it wasn't a far stretch, right? I mean, a lot of us do all of our back office stuff online. All of our communications are online. So it wasn't a far stretch. A lot of us already had Zoom. Like, I was operating more on GoToMeeting, and then everybody went with Zoom, and I was like, okay, well, we'll do both. I don't know, whatever
Yeah.
platform works for you.
Like whatever makes you comfortable, I am ready to do. It does not matter to me. I will use whatever platform you want to use. But no, it's true. It makes me think back to the last mediation I participated in as a litigator, as an attorney. And it was contentious. It was a big one. And I remember I arrived at the lobby of this huge office building, and it was the type where everybody had to log in, and you're waiting in line with all of these people, and my client did not want to see the opposing party. And I was like, sir, there is absolutely nothing I'm going to be able to do to prevent that unless we show up really, really early or try to coordinate with the other side. But we weren't getting along with them well enough to even try to coordinate that. And so, of course, we ran into them, or I ran into the other side, and I called my client and I said, don't come in yet. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And so on Zoom, I don't have to do that. I use my waiting room feature. I let people in as I want to let them in. So if I know that two people don't need to be together, they're not going to be together. And so it's been great. It's been so much easier. And
now people know what Zoom rooms are, but they don't know that we used to call them like caucus rooms. Like it has a lot of features that really help facilitate what we were trying to do in person anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people, and I have a book coming out about virtual proceedings and hearings, and it'll include a section on mediation. And I'm working with some really cool people on that. So look for that. But yeah, it's kind of like mind mapping, I guess, the way that you would see, like imagine yourself walking into the office of like a mediation office or a mediation firm. Like you walk in, you're in a waiting room, and somebody greets you and they tell you where to go. And that's the exact same thing that happens, except it's a heck of a lot easier because you're like in your pajamas, maybe in your house, and you log in, and then the mediator's there, and I tell you what you're going to do and where you're going to go and who you're going to see. And there's like very little work for the lawyer to do.
Well, yeah, I totally understand. And now the book that you're talking about that you're creating is more like training of how to do online mediation and arbitration.
Yes.
But you also managed to do something fun. So how did you possibly grow your practice, write a book called #networked, or maybe you just say networked, I don't know, maintain your sanity as a mother, a wife, a business owner, all of this during a pandemic?
Oh my God. Am I still sane? Am I still sane? I don't know. It's been insane, but I am so happy that things have worked out the way that they've worked. So many people are struggling during COVID, and I am not one of them. And my family is doing great. So I keep it moving. Anything that I can do, I'm just doing. I'm exhausted. I'm overwhelmed. But there's a smile on my face, and I'm happy. And networked is one of the best things that has ever happened to me. I mean, maybe it's like the fifth best thing that's ever happened to me because I have 4 kids. Okay, I'll even say 6 because I have a husband and he might hear this. But to have like a #1 best-selling book for like a couple of weeks is just like beyond what I thought. Like, I mean, if you would have asked me like December 2019 what I'd be doing right now, like talking about a best-selling book is not one of them. Like,
yeah,
that was definitely not on my business plan, like at all. So,
Well, but I read some of it, which I thought was fascinating. And there was a group of attorneys, female attorneys, I think that's
Mhm.
powerful, that kind of got together and said, how are we going to, I think we all kind of created our groups, right? Because at the beginning I was like, why is everybody having mental health issues? Just work, like stay focused, just work. And then it kept on going and kept on going. And I, dealing with doing it all. And I was like, oh yeah, mental health is a huge issue right now, huge issue. But this was kind of, it seems like from an outsider looking in, kind of a way that you guys did stay sane and helped each other, through
Mhm.
those time periods. And then you created a book, basically, right? How you
Yeah.
all kind of survived and thrived during the pandemic, which I think is very fascinating. Very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the group started, listen, I don't even know when the group started. I joined I joined the group, I believe in May. I think it was in May this year. My dear friend Sherry Bellitz invited me into the group, and that's when I joined. And but I know that they had been going strong for I think since March. I
Mm.
think since March. A couple of them, I think, knew each other before that. But yeah, we have turned into just a huge friendship group. We are constantly, and I say constantly, and I literally mean constantly. Like there are messages all day long, and I'm looking at the notifications. They're constantly coming in, and one of the women described it as like a coffee shop, like a 24-hour coffee shop, like whatever you need, like somebody's there to respond. It could be a question about, oh, I've got this question in discovery and I'm not exactly sure how to answer it. Somebody will respond to you. Or I'm potty training my toddler and this happened. I don't know what to do. My husband did this. What do I do?
Mm.
Um, my best friend did this. What do I do? And I mean, it's just, it runs the gambit. So we are a solid group of random girlfriends that found each other through LinkedIn posts. It's
Mhm.
crazy. And so what we all had in common was that we knew that we were very serious about our work and our business and maintaining it through the pandemic. We all realized we needed to pivot to an online way of networking and maintaining contact with our clients. And we connected through substantive LinkedIn posts, really. And so just making comments on each other's posts. And really, so Sherry, the woman I told you brought me into the group, she had written an article and she made a post about virtual jury trials and implicit bias associated with that process.
Mhm.
And the way I went off about it earlier, I went off about it on her post, and the next thing you know, we spent 2 hours on the phone, and we had developed a webinar, and we've now done two webinars together, and we're creating a series. I mean it's been like that. And so at every turn, there's been someone to help whoever do something, because we all do something very different.
Mhm. Well, and I think that most people at the beginning of the pandemic, were kind of like, I had a plan. And, like we had like our best first quarter like ever. And I was like, this is going to be the most amazing year. And then I was like, what? Wait, what? Excuse me? I'm sorry. This is not in the plan. Because all of us type A personalities are like, sorry, not in the plan. But I think also a lot of us kind of stepped back and said, okay, where can I see the silver lining? Where can I see the rainbow in this storm? Because the storm will end, but it will also be in how you dealt with it during. How did you move? How did you change? How did you help your clients in different ways and things like that? And I think to kind of round out this podcast, we've actually talked about the future of litigation. We've talked about the future of mediation, but where do you see, kind of holistically, if we could just summarize it a little bit, where do you see the future of litigation after COVID?
Oh man. I see the future of litigation being more online. I think it's going to be more accessible to more people.
Mhm.
I think it's going to be easier for attorneys, more convenient for attorneys. It's going to be less formal. I think the days of the all-day cattle call are gone. Thank God. Who liked that? Who thought that was a good idea? Um, I think it's going to save everyone money. It's going to save insurance companies money. I mean, I remember spending 6, 7 hours sometimes at a cattle call for a hearing that may have taken 5 minutes, and just a complete waste of a day. And I don't think we're going to see that anymore. I think that attorneys are going to say that makes no sense. It never made sense. And now that we know that we can do better, we're going to do better. And I think that attorneys are also going to be so much more used to using the virtual space, the Zoom for lack of another term to use, that they're going to be mediating more. They're going to arbitrate more virtually. And I think we're going to see a dip in things that are litigated to jury trial, especially litigated to in-person jury trial.
I think that some of the things that are changing now, I envisioned changing in the next 5 years. And in some respects, I feel like we just like hyper escalated it. And, people, I mean, it's crazy, but people that really kind of just take this virtual environment and like give it a huge hug and kiss and say, I'm all in and I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to do my job in the best way I can in that platform, are going to really reap the benefits, because I think that people who don't want to play in the platform of online are going to leave. It could be at the end of their career. It could be that they, were past retirement anyway, but we're going to see the exodus. And then we're going to see people kind of stay in there. Now, what about, let's switch it around. And where do we see the future of mediation?
Okay, I'm only slightly biased, but
Right. Me too. Me too.
I see mediation taking off. I really do. I see mediation becoming potentially a mandatory process in every state of the union. I really do. And I think that that would be a huge benefit. For example, I'm not sure what you do in Missouri. Mediation is not mandatory in Georgia. A judge can order you to mediation. You can request to be sent to mediation, but it is not mandatory across the board. In Florida, under certain circumstances, for all intents and purposes, it is mandatory before you go to trial. And that works really, really well in a state that is relatively litigious. I'll leave it at that. What I also see, of course, is moving a lot of mediation online. I see more effective mediators being able to work across boundaries through different states and working with the people that trust them and want to work with them. I see mediators having a greater opportunity to build their businesses, to have large stakes in the litigation industry, the way that you see law firms. So I see mediation becoming an even bigger business than it is. So right now we do have several huge um, mediation firms. I see independent mediators starting to take a lot of that business and becoming big firms in and of themselves.
Mhm.
I definitely foresee that. Um, I
And I
see. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's interesting because I don't think some people understand that certain states do require maybe a couple hours of mediation to see if you can figure it out before you go to trial. But also, what I've seen in the expert side is that I think good experts are now going to be able to be available to more people. Because before it was like, well, are you going to travel to Texas, Idaho, Kansas? You
Right.
know, for a trial, and is that expense going to prohibit them from using you? Whereas now I think we all had no time. We had no time for our lives, and this is kind of going to help us get some of that back by being more efficient, I think, with mediation. um,
Yeah.
and I think that people are, in my mind, mediation puts some of the control back into the parties. You know, they come into litigation, they're like, solve my problems, lawyers, judge, jury. And then they're like, wait, you solve my problem. That stinks. I don't want to do that. Whereas
Yeah.
mediation, it's like, okay, how do you guys want to fix this? And you do have more control than you would with a jury or judge, for sure. Um, I mean, you can't do anything you want. Having control doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want, but it
Right.
certainly allows you to enunciate and communicate your best option, and the other party to do that, and then to find a medium ground where it could be at least a decent option for both of you. And I think
Yeah.
that will help people.
I think that along the lines of what you're saying, I think that we are in a really amazing position to use mediation as a means of rebuilding trust in this country with the citizenry in the justice system,
Mhm.
giving people back control over their cases. Now we don't have a system set up right now uh, on a large scale where mediators can really work through community based criminal issues. I mean, the example that was set in Rwanda with Gachacha is something that blows my mind every time I think about it. So if anybody's listening and is not familiar with that, please go look it up. It is just the way that they were able to heal their community and come together was unbelievable. We don't have that in America right now. And I don't anticipate we'll have it soon. But I think for a large part of the country that is concerned um, and just basically distrusting of the justice system in general. I think if we can show them through mediation and diverse neutrals in mediation, minorities, women, LGBTQ plus, whatever that minority is, showing them that there are people like them or people who are just who look different than what they expect us to look like or expect us to sound like, then they can start to feel a little bit more at ease, have a little bit more respect for the process. And going, they go out into the community and they say, I had a great experience at mediation, and this is what my mediator was like. So, if you ever are in a situation where such and such happens, maybe you don't want to go before a judge that doesn't look like you in whatever random county you're in the middle of nowhere. Maybe you
Mhm.
do want to try mediation. Maybe you do want to try arbitration because you get to pick your mediator. You get to pick your arbitrator.
Mhm.
you know, you get far more control. And especially when we're talking about the online realm, and where mediators and arbitrators don't have to be licensed attorneys It's a different skill set. We often are, but it is a different skill set. You can pick from across the country. You can pick who you want. You can pick that person that makes you feel comfortable. And that is extremely empowering to go into this very serious process that's going to have tremendous impact on your life, your lawsuit, and go in knowing that you feel comfortable with the person that you're going to spend that day with, talking to, opening up to, and not already having some negative connotation or bias against that person, which may or may not be warranted, but you may not have those issues going in. I think that helps a lot.
Yeah. And I think that, interesting what you're saying. I think co-mediation is going to be even bigger, to have diversity even on the team that is trying to help you. I think right now I will venture to, I don't know, forecast the future, right? And I think that you have litigation on one side that has rules and constructs and a process and everything, and then you have mediation that is a little bit more. Mediators do different things in different states and different areas. Different mediators even have different, but I think you're going to start to see them come to the middle and say, how can we use what worked best in litigation and what works best in mediation to have this kind of hybrid model? And some could say maybe it's arbitration, right? But I think it's even going to be different. It's going to be different than that, where we're going to actually start to utilize the system to get to a place where we have people getting resolution as opposed to just fighting and making money for all of us involved. And then it's not great resolution. So I'm hoping that that's where, and I'm hoping you and I are part of what gets it to there. Because it really is a helpful process. And I think it helps people get to where they need to go. And it takes some skilled people. It takes some people to know what the pre-COVID litigation looked like, and what we did and how we did it, so that we can carry in some of the best practices into mediation, but we can get rid of some of the stuff that didn't work.
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe even do more work, because I love the online process. I think that I now pay more attention to my Zoom calls. Like, I'm looking at people and I'm like, what do they do? Are they paying attention? They're not paying attention, all of these types of things. But as kind of the follow-up, is there anything else that we could tell people? Do you want to tell them about yourself? Because I think you're saying you have a newer mediation practice, but the reality is a lot of people in this space are newer in it because they've had a long background of, legal. You don't have to be a lawyer to be a mediator. I totally understand, but you have a legal background or a litigation background or a negotiation background. The background can be endless, but tell them more about you and your background.
Okay. I hate talking about myself, but I'll do it. So I've been an attorney for 14 going on 15 years. I have a background in general liability, defense primarily. I did a short stint as a plaintiff's lawyer. I even did a short stint as a criminal defense attorney. So I've done a lot, but I have always wanted to be a mediator. I've spent my entire practice making sure I had a diverse legal background, so that I would be the best mediator that I could be. So every firm that I worked at, I picked it. I picked the boss I wanted. I picked the the subject matter. I wanted to know a lot about a lot of things. And so, it's funny to me now that people say, wow, you seem to have come out of nowhere. And I'm like, it looks like that. Yeah. It looks like that But this has been a very long journey for me. And it is just now at this point that it's become very visible. And really it's visible thanks to COVID, because otherwise I would be having these conversations at Lawyers Club in
Mhm.
Atlanta, in person. And so now I'm having them on a national stage and sometimes an international stage. And so I'm just very blessed for that. Um, I I work in so many different areas. Anything from your standard car wreck to wrongful death. I do a lot of professional malpractice, primarily legal malpractice and medical malpractice. Um, Defamation is one of my specialties. Municipal water intrusion cases. I know that sounds crazy, but that's one of my things. I love it. Um,
Well, yeah,
I
and
know.
you are very active on LinkedIn. You are creating articles, you're doing webinars, you're doing podcasts. This is actually a product of COVID. This podcast was all created from COVID because we were like, well, what are
Love
we
it.
going to do now? How do we talk to people when we can't talk to, we can't hang out. So,
Right.
but you are very active, so they can definitely follow you on LinkedIn and watch all of your information. We're going to provide contact information to call you, to reach out. You're doing mediation in Atlanta, but like we've talked about in this program, mediation is online now. So online mediation services can be done in any location. And you
Yeah.
really do, I think it really is going to be about finding somebody that you connect with, that makes sense to you, that speaks your language. Because that person, sometimes it's a day that you'll talk to them. Sometimes it's multiple days over the course of time. Not every
Right.
case is really simple. And so this is going to be a person that you're going to continue to work with. And so if Winter kind of resonates with you, I think you should reach out to her and talk to her about your situation. Because especially in some of these bigger firms, you're going to have just a bigger bandwidth. You're going to have some amazing technology. We all have access to a lot of things, but I think you're doing some phenomenal stuff. So I hope to have you on again, maybe on the Mediator podcast, and we'll talk about mediation and negotiation techniques, which kind of gets in the weeds for the rest of us that are not doing it as often. But I do appreciate you coming on today, Winter. And if there's anything else we can tell the audience, great. If not, then we'll make sure they get connected to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be on whatever podcast you would like to have me on.
Awesome.
This has been really fun. I am a mediation geek, so I mean
I
I talk
know.
about it all day. So yes, I would appreciate anyone who wants to follow up with me. Find me on LinkedIn. My name is Winter. It's spelled just like the season.
Yeah.
There's one Winter Wheeler out there. Thank God, right? Like I don't have, I don't have
And
to
there's so
really.
many great things that you can play on your name, like Winter is Coming. I thought I saw you do something like I loved that. I
Yes,
was like, oh,
that's
it just doesn't have the
like
same as
yeah.
like Melissa is Coming. It's like, oh, okay.
Yes,
Nah,
one of my co-authors actually suggested that I start using that hashtag, and I was like, why not?
I like it.
So yeah, so hashtag winter is coming. You can find me. I also hashtag my name because that's really easy.
Yeah.
Hashtag Winter Wheeler.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Well, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.